Fun fact, for those of you who don't know, my first name is not Austin, it's actually Timothy. So, Merry Christmas. I could win the Oscar.
You tramped all the way from Minnesota. Why is that?
I wanted to catch a spark.
All right, so let's talk about a complete unknown. In 1961, 19-year-old Bob Dylan arrives in New York City with his guitar. He forges relationships with music icons. As this film culminates in a groundbreaking performance that reverberates worldwide, this movie is rated R. For language, that's about it. I've always thought James Mangold does a great job of even making his more R-rated movies something that's accessible for a lot of people. Now, with a musical biopic, especially one regarding or revolving around Bob Dylan, this one's going to be a tougher nut to crack because not everyone's a Bob Dylan fan, although the people that are, I feel like, are really hardcore into their fandom, or at least you're aware of all of his writing credits. This guy is a phenomenal writer. However you feel about his voice, you have to admit his songs get ingrained in your brain after hearing them. And even hearing Timothée Chalamet sing some of these songs, which, first of all, love that decision, not only for his Oscar chances, but it gives him a shot to do something a little bit more than maybe what we see in musical biopics, when people use their voice a little bit, but they're also mixing in the other voice. No, in this case, it's Timothée Chalamet. It's also Edward Norton, who plays Pete Seeger, singing his songs along the way, which was awesome. Monica Barbaro as Joan, they do a great job of making her look and feel like a star at that time when she's on stage. Also, the chemistry between she and Chalamet's Bob Dylan is great. I'm not saying it's always good all the time, but the energy between them is really fun to watch on screen. You have Elle Fanning as Sylvie, an amalgamated, from what I can understand, love interest that wasn't really one specific person in Bob Dylan's life, but it kind of represents a combination of a few people. That's what I read. And the cast as a whole is really stacked. Scoot McNairy's also in this movie. Boyd Holbrook as Johnny Cash. There's something about Boyd Holbrook, one, in a James Mangold movie, but two, just in any movie, stealing the show with little screen time. I'm not saying make him the next big star, but I want to see more of him doing everything. Also, I want to see more of him as Johnny Cash. Can we get Boyd Holbrook back in this role? How does that work? So again, this covers the early 60s, that span of years, and it all culminates at this final performance that we get when Bob Dylan essentially says, yes, folk music is the reason why I'm here. That was the reason behind my rise to fame. But this electric guitar is pretty cool. And I've seen some valid complaints regarding this movie. People saying, well, we just didn't really learn that much about Bob Dylan. And I somewhat agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, I disagree because I did learn that Bob Dylan is an unlearnable man. Austin, what does that mean? This guy is in his own stratosphere, in his own world, if you will. And Chalamet plays that beautifully. He doesn't care what people want. He doesn't understand the complex emotions of others. Numerous scenes with Elle Fanning throughout this film where she's just kind of had it up to here with Bob because he's living in his own world. And he's just like, yeah, what do you want me to do? I mean, I'm not going to change for you. I'm not going to change for anyone. I'm going to be myself. You see that at a point in the film when he's on stage and he's refusing to change for the people that don't understand that they are a part of this significant cultural moment, because you can't spoil much about a biopic, but one of the integral songs that you hear him sing in the trailer, and there are a lot of frustrations that are spawning from that in that sequence, but people are unaware that that was a culturally significant moment, and Dylan is doing what it takes to go about that moment. I love that, man. I thought this movie did a great job of building the world around Bob Dylan, allowing us to somewhat explore his psyche, but still walk away from the movie like, yeah, that guy just did not conform to anything or for anyone, because that's who he is, right? And this isn't a movie where he's going through this really tough time in his life and there's this villainous entity getting in his way, like, okay, we have to overcome this major obstacle, jump over this huge hoop just to get to where we want to go. No. Bob Dylan becomes really famous really fast. I will say, movie-wise, a little too fast for my liking. I thought the pacing was good for the most part, but at times a bit rocky because we don't fully comprehend or grasp the passage of time in this movie. We span 4 to 5 years, but you never really know where we are on that timeline because he's going everywhere, he's doing everything, he's singing with people. You've got a little bit of time spent with Elle Fanning and Edward Norton, and there's Boyd Holbrook as Johnny Cash. I love that they're sending letters to each other. When we finally get to see him, he's stumbling over himself. I thought that scene was awesome, especially when they are around each other, when they're both about to go on stage, their interactions, just the looks that they have with each other. It's like you're seeing these two people, and I didn't feel like I was watching, that's Boyd Holbrook, and that's Timothée Chalamet. Holbrook sinks fully into the role, but Chalamet gives maybe his best performance to date.
What do you mean by that?
You know how much I love Dune Part 2. Chalamet is spectacular, but in terms of range, there isn't much he has to do spanning all points of that range. This is a movie where, yes, he's a little he's very introverted. Maybe the most introverted character I've seen on screen all year, but he also gets very emotional. You can see the frustration when he's having these conversations that he's just very uncomfortable with. Gets on stage. Chalamet's voice, I believe, fits so well with this character, but with Bob Dylan in general. And, Bob Dylan, still alive, has a chance to watch this movie, said good things about it on Twitter. But it's just really cool seeing him capture this, feeling Bob Dylan, and knowing this story that we are seeing that they're telling doesn't end on a tragic note. Because that's another thing about the musical biopic, or really the biopic in general. A lot of the times it ends on a tragic note, and there's some crazy things that happen culturally and the rise and fall of folk music. We're in the midst of that. We're seeing this transition, but not only a transition music-wise, but culturally, how these massive political moments with JFK and these political elements would influence where Bob Dylan was going, or in his mind where he was headed, but also just how if he's done with something, he's done with something. And that's the kind of guy that he is. So again, you're not fully exploring his mind, but you're learning about how Bob Dylan operated in that time and getting to see going from where he was at the beginning to how we ultimately end with that big concert sequence, which again, I thought came together beautifully. Mangold's always done that. Obviously, Walk the Line, that's the one. That's the gold standard. But it's also the one that you could look at and say, well, that kind of spawned into a bunch of generic things that we've seen in musical biopics. So it was great on its own, but it set a generic standard. He could have absolutely done that with a Bob Dylan movie, but he chose not to go in a different direction, to give us something that's a little bit different that some people may find boring, and I understand that. But he also captured the early 60s really well, from the atmosphere to the rock-solid filmmaking, and not things I've never seen before on screen, but ultimately does a nice job. And the concert/music sequences are really well done, just top-notch. You can tell Mangold's been here before. Before I give you my score, what are you watching on Christmas Day, and are you ready? Because we're doing top movies of the year coming this week. If you want to see the worst movies of the year, drop that like.
Uh-oh.
A Complete Unknown is not your standard biopic, even though we know Mangold could execute that to perfection. There is a mysterious complexity to Dylan that makes it difficult to fully understand him, but the film leans heavily on this idea and ultimately allows us to make up our own minds. The passage of time will occasionally impact its pacing. It does go on a little longer than necessary, but there is a lot of ground to cover. Chalamet is firmly in the Oscar conversation, and I enjoyed this unconventional biopic experience. I'm also a big James Mangold fan, so a little biased there, but I'm not biased towards Bob Dylan. I like Bob Dylan, I like his music, but I'm not super into it. Maybe I will be after watching this movie, or maybe I just want to hear Timothée Chalamet sing. I'm a Chalamet stan now. Okay, he's a college football fan. What do you want me to do? Thanks for watching. See you soon.